G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope you are super well. Today I am coming to you via the Z8 and the 50mm 1.2. We are shooting in 8Ks of glory. The reason for that is because the Z6III is on the table here on my left. Audio is being captured by DJI Mic 2, absolutely loving it. And today is Global Tall Hair Day. But we're not here to talk about all or any of those things. We're here to talk about the Z5II, the right camera for you. All of these full frame cameras, and there's one little sneaky non-full frame camera, but they're all around 24 megapixels, with the APS-C one being around 21 megapixels. Where should you go in the Nikon range? There's an enormous choice of affordable cameras now available for Z mount mirrorless. All right, well, on my left is the new cameras in this lineup we have here from Nikon. We have the Z5II and the Z6III. And yes, indeed, I've just moved the ZF over to this side here for a reason, because these three cameras here on the left are all Expeed 7 cameras. These are all the latest offerings, although the ZF is getting towards the 2-year mark. But at the end of the day, the technology in all three of these cameras here on the right side of frame, they are very similar. On my right, we have the Z50, the Z6, and the Z6II. Today, my Z6 is standing in for the original Z5, the OG. And of course, the Z50 is standing in for the Z50II. All of these cameras here today are great opportunities for any type of photographer. From the absolute beginner all the way up to the professional, all of these cameras can satiate their needs. Obviously, a camera as entry level as the Z50, it probably wouldn't be considered for professional usage, but you absolutely could use it for it, all the way up to the Z6III. Perhaps you're here because this is the first mirrorless camera you're going to buy. And I think the first delineation that we should make is, are you interested in APS-C? So that is a physically smaller sized sensor. APS-C has less than 50% of the area of a 35mm, or often known as a full frame, and in Nikon parlance it is known as an FX sized sensor. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages for going one way or the other, but ultimately that larger sensor gives you more. It gives you more capacity for low light gathering, and this is physics. Nowadays, a lot of that is being offset by fantastic high ISO performance. And also, of course, we now have the advent of AI noise reduction. Here is an image shot at 6400 ISO at f4, shutter of 1/5, handheld. Now we're going to push this even further. We're going to go 2 whole stops. There it is. And if we go into 100%, we can see there's noise. This is what the AI noise reduction in DxO Photolab 8 can do for us. And in the sliders somewhere is the balance between noise reduction and detail. This is 6400 ISO, and this is pretty much in the dark, the original exposure. We can see the noise appearing here, very much a lot of color noise. Now we turn on the deep prime and you can just see what a fantastic job it does. We'll just turn this off again and you can see that there's dead pixels. This is what AI noise reduction and pixel removal is doing for us, saving a lot of time having to get hot pixels and removing them yourself. Obviously, this is something that you can reset in your cameras all the time by running through a particular sequence of functions. Please find a 20% discount link below running until the end of Easter for Photolab 8 or any other new license for any DxO product. Please ensure you use the exact code at checkout. All of these things come together to make the APS-C sensor more powerful than it's ever been. But at the end of the day, physics is physics. You'll always get a little bit more from your sensor if it has larger photo sites. And the other most important thing to know about APS-C versus 35mm full frame is how your lenses behave. For example, if you put a standard 50mm lens on a full frame camera, you will get the full field of view of that 50mm lens. If you put the exact same lens on an APS-C camera, your field of view narrows by 1.5 times and you get a 75mm field of view equivalent. All your lenses become, in very basic terms, they become less wide. So you have to think about that. Now, this is completely solvable by buying wider lenses, and obviously on the long end, if you're interested in things like birding, well, turning your 200mm lens into a 300mm lens, your 400mm lens into a 600mm lens field of view equivalent, that is beneficial to some use cases. So that's the difference when it comes to the image, but there is also a difference when it comes to how depth of field is rendered. Now, this differential is fairly minor and we won't deep dive on it here, other than to say that 35mm allows you to have a better sense of the short depth of field when you are using wide apertures on your lenses. 35mm is better at that. Let's assume in this video that we've decided to go full frame 35mm FX. So we're going to pull the Z50 and the Z52 off the table. We have the Z5, the Z6 and the Z6II in Expeed 6, and on my left we have the Z5II, the ZF and the Z6III. These are all choices that you can still buy today. Now, when we talk about the Z6 original, I suspect they're pretty hard to get new, although you might find some officially refurbished models which will be similar to or just like new, and some of them may well come with a Nikon official warranty. So I suspect they're still available. The Z6II continues to be available, and obviously the Z6III, along with the Z5II and the ZF. These are all cameras we can still get our hands on. So where should we land? What's really interesting to me about spending a number of weeks with the brand new Z5II is that it is a very powerful camera. Now, from my perspective and my use case, it is above all of these cameras except for the Z6III. For example, the ZF does not have internal RAW video, and there are a few features like product mode that currently don't exist in the ZF. Now, part of what the ZF is about, and we can clearly see it here sitting on the table, is that it is a retro designed body. It's aimed at a completely different market. It's aimed at people that are interested in the vibe, the look. At the end of the day, the difference between the ZF and the Z5II is pretty minimal. And for the majority of use cases, they would be considered quite similar. Let's have a little bit of a look at some of the differences between the ZF and the Z5II. They are both 25.28 million total pixels. Camera uses 24.5, the effective pixels. So sensor appears to be exactly the same size. It doesn't mean it's exactly the same sensor. Maybe there's some tweaking of the sensor's hardware, and certainly they can do whatever they like when it comes to tweaking software side of things, which is things like color science and how they deal with noise reduction. These are the things that you can do in software. When we look at the two cameras side by side in 8-bit and 10-bit, they are very similar once again, but when we look at raw video, that just simply does not exist at all with the ZF. They both use micro HDMI, which is otherwise known as Type D. One place they absolutely do differ is in storage media. The Z5II is 2 SD cards, which are UHS 2 compliant, whereas the ZF has one UHS 2 slot and one UHS 1 slot, which is the micro SD slot. Viewfinders appear to be very similar, except for the brightness level of the Z5II is brighter, and we can see it represented here with the 13 levels versus 18 levels of manual brightness controls. If we look at the shutter speeds, they are again very similar, maxing out at around 30 frames per second in JPEG, full frame 24 megapixels, and both of them have a version of RAW that sits around 14 frames per second. Looking at highest standard ISO sensitivity, the ZF is rated at 51,000 and the Z5II is rated at
64,000, just giving you that little bit of extra push into the darkness. I'm guessing it could be very, very, very slight changes to the sensor and perhaps some very slight changes to the processing algorithms that are in the Z5II. In other words, the team has had just a little bit longer to work on noise reduction, and thus Nikon are comfortable pushing this camera just ever so slightly further.
The Z5II is officially a less expensive camera than the ZF, and thus you do pay a little bit of a premium for that beautiful retro look, those brass dials, that just beautiful build aesthetic. The other thing you have to talk about when you're considering a Z5II versus a ZF is the ergonomics. The ergonomic approach to these two cameras is very different. Yes, the ZF looks beautiful, but it is not as ergonomic as all of the other cameras we can see here. Again, that is a simple choice. Things like the two function buttons on the front of the Z5II and all of these other cameras besides the ZF is very useful to a lot of users. Also, some people don't want to be fiddling around with those retro style dials on the top. But the ZF is a different vibe. It's more about taking your time, slowing down, and really enjoying the whole process, the activity of photography. The Z5II is designed to be a tool and to work as efficiently as possible. So again, this is up to you to consider which way you want to go. The ZF is a little heavier. I do find the EVF in the Z5II to be more pleasing. And one thing I feel really confident saying about this new camera is that the backside illuminated sensor, CMOS sensor, that we find in both the ZF and the Z5II, both of these sensors are magnificent. On top of that, I have to say I've been very, very impressed with the picture quality that has come out of the Z5II. Now, some of that might be me using the absolutely beautiful 35mm 1.2S. Some of it might be that. But I did use other lenses like the 135 Viltrox, the 24-120 f4S, as well as just a few shots with my 70-200 2.8S. All of these for sure are very, very good lenses, but I have used some of those lenses on the ZF, and I just feel like Nikon has sprinkled as much engineering magic to make the Z5II this just outstanding entry-level camera. At this point, from my perspective, it makes the Z5II very compelling against some of these other cameras we have here on the right, like the Z6 and the Z6II. Yes, they will always be cheaper, but they get nowhere near the features that we find in the Z5II. Let's talk a little bit about the differences between them. These cameras, video caps out at 8-bit. And 8-bit's fantastic. We all used 8-bit video in our DSLRs and in our mirrorless cameras for over a decade. Nothing wrong with it. 10-bit though is more versatile. It does allow for a little bit more calibration in post-processing. So you have to work out yourself whether you need 8-bit or 10-bit. I certainly could say that 8-bit is enough if you're just beginning your creator journey, or if, for example, you're using the camera to create family memories. But if your aspirations are a little bit further than that, then the 10-bit is useful. But not only does the Z5 have 10-bit, but this camera could, from my perspective, be used in absolutely full-blown professional settings. Because it has that 10-bit, it has the ability to do log, and it has the ability to do raw 12-bit video. All of those things, these cameras over here on my right can't even get near to it. So from a video perspective, this is absolutely head and shoulders above the previous Expeed 6 offerings. And when it comes to stills, these cameras hit around the 14 frames per second, and that is mechanical shutter. The Z5II in mechanical, it caps out at 14 frames per second. Now from my perspective, that is still pretty impressive when you consider that the flagship D5 camera, its limit was 12 frames per second with full AE and AF. That is a lot of bang for buck. But if you do need more, you can flip over to the C30 or C15 mode and shoot in JPEG up to 15 or 30 frames per second. This is something that the Z6 and the Z6II cannot do. So the capability is there to shoot fast and capture those moments when, say, the kids are doing a race or whatever else you need. Although I would suggest there's perhaps another option, which might even be more useful, and that is to shoot video. Of course, you can shoot 4K video up to 60 frames per second with a crop. Now, the crop's fine. You're in APS-C/DX mode, as Nikon call it, and this gives you that little bit of extra reach, which is usually really helpful when you're shooting things like races or action or things at a distance. And then, you really want a lot of frame rates? Well, you can get 60 of them per second. The Z6 does not do 60 frames per second. The Z6II does, with the same crop. And they are similar in that specification. There is a huge number of advancements that has come with the Expeed 7 cameras. Let's take a look at that.
Z5, Z6, Z6II are the previous generation of processor, the Expeed 6. In Expeed 7, which the Z5II is, we get a whole raft of more advanced features. There are so many, but I'm just going to talk about some of my favorites in this video. High efficiency and high efficiency star RAW compression. This is an amazing feature added first with the Z9 that allows our files to basically look the same as a RAW file, a standard RAW file, yet the compression allows it to be 60% of the size, or almost half the size. This makes a massive difference to storage and speed and everything that we do, yet we seemingly have no difference in picture quality. HE Star is the one that I choose, and I've been using it since the Z9 arrived in 2021. This cannot be found in Expeed 6 cameras. Advanced subject detection options. This is autofocus, and for some users this is absolutely critical, whether they are into birding or whether they are into aeroplanes and so much more. Subject detection of this level far superior to the Expeed 6 versions, and with just so many different subjects. And overall focus acquisition is much faster than the Expeed 6 cameras. Product review mode. This is a fantastic mode in video that allows the camera to prioritize an object that you put in front of your face. So you can still be in face detection, but product mode will override that and make the product the priority. I absolutely love this feature, which cannot be found in all cameras, but is certainly in the Z5 II. Pre-release capture. This is a function that allows you to essentially go back in time. Whilst you are, say, waiting for a bird to take off from its perch, you are half pressing the shutter release button and the camera is buffering back in time up to 1 second. And if you want to suddenly keep those images, you do the full press and that second before is kept. In the Z5 II, these images are recorded as JPEGs. Pre-release capture cannot be found in any Expeed 6 camera. Nikon Imaging Cloud, which cannot be found in all Expeed 7 cameras, just the most recent few so far. The advantages of the Imaging Cloud is that you can automatically upload images to the cloud, automatically download new firmware, and get access to different picture controls. That's color profiles for your camera. Overall, this is a great feature which will only get better over time. And out of the rather large raft of updates that come with Expeed 7, the final one I'm going to include in this video, because it is a very long list, is pixel shift. This is something that I would actually use, and to me it's pretty amazing that your 24 megapixel camera gets just shy of 100 megapixels when using pixel shift. And how this is done is by combining multiple images. Not only can you increase resolution, but you can also increase color fidelity and reduce noise depending on how many images you actually capture. In the case of this implementation, of course, a tripod is required. And what about versus the original Z5?
Well, to me, there's almost nothing to talk about there. Yes, it's going to be a lot more affordable, and now that this camera is out, it will be a really good deal for an entry-level full-frame camera. There's no question. It still has 24 megapixels. It is not a BSI sensor.
And very briefly, what is BSI? Well, basically it means that the wiring for the sensor is behind the light gathering component, so it doesn't get in the way, and the light gathering is closer to the light, and thus more light gets in. That's a very simple version of it.
It still has in-body image stabilization. Its video specs are far reduced though. 4K is with a very large crop. 1080p, yes, it still shoots full frame. And really, this is the camera I would likely consider if you want the absolutely most budget entry-level camera and you really are making the choice that you don't want any of the other bells and whistles. You don't want frame rates because the Z5 is 4.5 frames per second. You don't want the best video. Its video spec is minimal, but it still has a beautiful sensor. It still has access to the amazing Z mount, and it still takes absolutely fantastic images. And of course, when it comes to photography, we have to talk about autofocus. And there's just simply no choice when it comes to autofocus. If you are someone who wants to rely on the autofocus and the subject detection systems within these cameras, then you simply have to choose Expeed 7. The jump between what Expeed 6 and Expeed 7 does, there is just no contest. You simply have to go with one of these three cameras here. Not only is it faster and superior AF, but we do have more subject detection modes. Now, something that's interesting is that the Z5II has bird detect as a detection mode, but the Z6III does not. Now, is this some sort of product differentiation by Nikon, or is it just simply that Nikon has not had the opportunity to update the firmware for the Z6III because they have so much going on at the moment? For example, do they do that for the Z6III or do they get the Z5II shipping? It's hard to say. If I was Nikon, I would get the Z5II shipping. So let's just zoom out for a second and let me talk about how I feel about all of this stuff, owning all of these cameras and having shot with all of them. When you're first using a camera out in the field, there are a few things that you immediately sense. One is, how is the in-body image stabilization performing? Is the graphical user interface swift? What does the EVF feel and look like? The thing about the Z5II, it felt like a Z6III, a Z8. It was just working in a very similar fashion. Is it identical? No, it's not. And in some cases, it feels even better. I feel like the in-body image stabilization might be just a hair better than, say, a Z8. And I think the thing that's blown me away the most about the Z5II is the image quality. The files that I'm getting out of this camera are superb. Now, some of that might be the fact that I've been shooting with the 35mm 1.2, which is just a revelation of a lens, and I'm just really enjoying it. But I've also shot with the Viltrox 135, the 24-1 20f4S, and the 70-200 2.8S. These are all great lenses that are making this sensor absolutely sing. So what it feels like to me is, Z6, Z5, Z6II, these were kind of the first generation of Nikon's mirrorless cameras. Absolutely. We know that. And now, with a camera like the Z5II, where the Expeed 7 processor has been around since 2021 with the Z9, Nikon have had 3 or 4 years to really refine what their processor is doing, refine their autofocus system, refine what they're giving us when it comes to video. But most importantly, from a stills photographer perspective, this sensor is just giving us beautiful files. 24 megapixel, just glorious files. And for the majority of people, this is going to be an absolutely stellar place to begin or continue your photography journey. And whether you're coming from a smartphone or APS-C or DSLR, This camera is going to meet and exceed your expectations. I'm confident of that. Of course, keeping use case in mind. If you're wanting Nikon's most powerful cameras, well, sure, you can spend 3 times more and buy a Z8, and even more and buy a Z9. Based on the cameras here on this table, you would be doing very, very well with a Z5 II. And it's only if you want more frame rates, that 20 frames per second RAW with that partially stacked sensor, or you think you need 6K RAW video. These to me are the major differences between the Z5 II and the Z6III. Of course, there's a little bit of a difference with the EVF, but that doesn't affect image quality. All of these cameras do not have flip forward screens. All of these cameras do. And for some people, that might be a profound difference. All right, everybody. Well, it's absolutely been spectacular to be with you today. We're riffing on here the differences between the 24 megapixel cameras that you can buy from Nikon today. And I think there's great opportunities wherever you decide to land. I do think if you're interested in the most modern technology, the Z5 II offers a great deal at this level in the market. I'd love to know your thoughts around all of that. It's been so good to see you, and I'd love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right. Bye for now.